Welcome back to Michiana Main Lines. Today we're continuing our story of the history of the South Bend railways, in particular Niles to South Bend. This is David Korkhouse's slideshow presentation of the history of the Niles Michigan to South Bend, Indiana railroad line. This was presented back in November of 2023 to the Northern Indiana Railway Society. This is David's presentation in its entirety, but I have added a few pictures and other items just to kind of round things out for clarity. We started in part one up near Niles, and we're continuing to work south, and we're not stopping until we get to South Bend. Today is part five, and there will be one final part. So if you like old railroad history, examining lines that don't exist anymore and kind of the way they looked when they were operated, this is definitely something you want to see. We're going to bring up our overview map here just to get our bearings again, which is the way we usually like to start. This map kind of focuses in on the area that we're going to be looking at today. Up north is Niles. The line came down from Niles to South Bend. Last episode we talked a lot about Notre Dame and the Notre Dame and Western. We talked about the St. Mary's Railroad. We're going to spend a lot of time again in this area covering the American Freedom Train in 1975. Then we're going to look a little bit at this appendage here, which was kind of the Michigan Central line, which came down into South Bend. There was some industries here and bridges and the former Michigan Central Depot. We'll see some shots of that. Then we will start today to examine the MC Connector, as it was called. That was this line here through the west side of South Bend. So let's get started. I'm going to start out here with just a few couple pictures that ended up out of sequence and they didn't get in the last part, and they should have been. This here was kind of a golden spike driving ceremony that was captured in the history books, 1890s, somewhere thereabouts. Another shot here of the line and a railroad crossing somewhere on the Notre Dame campus. Here's another miscellaneous slide from the Notre Dame area. This looks like some kind of a trackside shanty. Here's a good shot of the Notre Dame football special trains over at the campus. This was in the vicinity of US 31 and Douglas Road, and you can see all the track that used to be there at the time and the football special trains. Incidentally, Notre Dame beat Southern Cal that day 32-0 and went on to be the national champions for that year. Here we're going to take a look at a little bit of video again. This is one of David Korkhouse's videos. This is on the St. Mary's campus area where the track crossed. That's the avenue that the crew member is standing on. So let's take a look at this. Northbound train. No sound, of course. This was old Super 8 film. Notice how the locomotive and caboose will uncouple from the rest of the train as they pull across the crossing. It's a maneuver that was being made in order to facilitate the movements to get cars maneuvered where they needed to be. Look at the track there. Freedom train comes to South Bend, 1975. That should be July 13th, 1975. But that was a pretty big event for the Niles to South Bend line. Here we'll take a look at our close-up map again, just kind of look at that area and where the Freedom train was. Again, now we have the Niles to South Bend line running north to south. To the right would be Niles. We see here the MC connector, which we'll be talking about later. Here was the Notre Dame spur, and the train was pretty much parked kind of in this area here. This was a siding that went through the Holy Cross Junior College campus and then joined up near St. Joseph High School, and this was a complete passing siding, even though it doesn't really show that detail here. Here's a clip from the South Bend Tribune showing the train coming to town. Pretty big deal. There was quite a crowd of people here locally that turned out to see it. In fact, nationally, it was estimated to be over 7 million people that turned out to see it as it stopped at various places across the lower 48 of the United States, and probably over tens of millions that actually viewed it passing through their communities or whatever on the way to its destinations. Here we see the train arriving in South Bend, Vassar Street. That's Holy Cross School and Church over to the right. Holy Cross parking lot back in here. This is not to be confused with Holy Cross Junior College, where we'll see some shots coming up in a little bit. Another shot here at a locomotive. That was an ex-Reading number 2101. It was a T1 484 locomotive. Here we have a view looking off of the Portage Avenue overpass. The train was approaching Woodward Avenue in South Bend, Indiana, and that same location was the site of several derailments. We'll see one of them in pictures in a little bit. Here we see the Freedom train crossing the bridge at Angela and Riverside. A little bit of steam engine terminology here for those that ain't familiar. Earlier we said that this was a 484. And what that means is, if you look here at the locomotive, up here in the front, the leading wheels, there's 4 of them, 2 on each side. In the middle here, you have 8 drive wheels, the large wheels, 4 on each side. And the trailing wheels here in the rear, again, 4, 2 on each side. So that's what that means. Behind the locomotive is the coal tender. That's this right here. And you see another tender behind it. That one carries water. That's the auxiliary tender, sometimes called the canteen. Another close-up shot here crossing the bridge. Now we see it up near the St. Mary's campus. This shot was taken off of the embankment for the toll road on and off ramp, which that nowadays is flat, but it was elevated, as we saw in pictures earlier in the earlier parts. This would be looking kind of south-southwestward, and this here would be what is now Brother Andre Boulevard. I believe back then it was just maybe called Douglas Road. Another shot here, same general area. You see the Notre Dame spur, which led to their coal pile branching off here, and their crane and hopper car. They were utilized to load coal into the tenders for the locomotive. Same area here again. Helper diesel that came down from Niles to help maneuver the cars for them and assist. Close-up shot here then again of the same area. Now originally they were to come in from the north side, from the Niles side, because their previous stop was in Kalamazoo. But if you remember, and I believe it was part 1 where we looked at where the South Bend line branched off of the line through Niles, the main line, there was that sharp curve kind of near Simplicity Pattern Company. Well, that was kind of considered to be maybe a problem for them. So they figured that the path of least regret would be to come in from the south. So they went down to Elkhart and then came over to South Bend and then came up the MC connector, and that's how they got into South Bend. Another look here around the Holy Cross campus area. Again, quite a good turnout. Another shot here looking north towards the toll road overpass or entrance ramp. Good look at the diesel number 7816, which came down from Niles. Notice these flags that were put on the four corners. That was David Korkhouse's contribution to the occasion by decorating the diesel. Another shot here of the diesel helping to maneuver the cars. 26 freight cars is usually what this consisted of, and there was actually two other locomotives that pulled the train when it was in different parts of the country. Here locally, it made stops, as I said before, Kalamazoo, Grand Rapids, Fort Wayne, and of course Chicago. Another good shot here looking southward. That's St. Joseph High School back there to the left. You get a good look here at that passing siding, how it connected up to the main. And of course, St. Joe High School buildings are all gone now. The last remaining was torn down probably just in the last couple of months. Another good look here where the siding joined up to the main. The crane and the coal car getting ready to load coal into the tenders for the Freedom train. Another look here with the siding and the locomotive. Again, you see a pretty good crowd back there. Close-up view. There we observe the loading of the coal. Another look at that from a different angle. 16,000 gallons of water in that tender. Look there at what would be kind of the entrance to Holy Cross Junior College. That looks a lot different nowadays. Of course, with all the track being gone and a lot of changes have taken place. Again, it's kind of looking south-southwest. Notice they even had the nifty viewing platform here where you could climb up and get a closer look at the locomotive. Now we're going to take a look here at this detail map again here just to get an idea what we're going to be looking at next. We're going to kind of take a look at these two appendages. First of all, this one that came right straight down into South Bend. This was kind of the original Michigan Central that came straight down, and this track was still used almost into the early 80s for a few freight customers on the line. The former depot was here right at the end, the Michigan Central Depot. We'll see some shots of that. And it crossed two roads here on bridges. This is looking south on that line. This would be the bridge over Michigan Street, or US 31. That being a walking trail now, the East Bank Trail. Here's a look at what that looks from underneath. A pretty massive, solid-looking bridge. Next street was Leaper Avenue. That's a side view of what that bridge looked like. 1974 picture courtesy of Jeff Strombeck, the late Jeff Strombeck. Here's what the top of that bridge looks like now with the trail in place. Here's a look at Niles Avenue. To the right is Sunny Italy Cafe. That still stands today. The track went down the street and there was some street running in this vicinity. In the background here was Rose Fuel and Materials. They were still a customer in the late 70s and probably till about 1980. Farther back, the track crossed and then went into the Indiana and Michigan power plant, and there were other industries that were served there back in the day. This track was removed in the early 80s. Here's a look at that station we saw earlier on the map, the South Bend station for the Michigan Central. Another view here from the other side. Now looking at the map again, we'll take some looks here now at the Michigan Central Connector, our MC Connector that we called it. This was this portion of track running through here. This was the Angela Bridge, Riverside, that we saw the Freedom Train cross. We'll get some more looks at that. Then the line ran past the Drury's plant through the west side neighborhoods of South Bend with neighborhood running, and then it crossed the New York Central and ended up down at Oliver's Yard. So we'll take some pictures of that. Also, it's important to note, right in this vicinity here was kind of a property divider. When the connector was built, it was kind of a collaboration between the New York Central and the Michigan Central. And that divider separated. The Michigan Central was to the right, the New York Central portion was to the left, and that became important operationally, and we'll see that in a little bit. Here's a look from around the Beale Street area on Riverside Drive. This was a train moving through the woods area, being kind of a fall shot. You got to see a little bit of it, but it's still kind of hard to see. But if you look here, you can see the locomotive, and you can see this yellow Clark Equipment Company tractors on a flat car, which we've seen on a lot of the pictures of trains coming through here. And this is where the line passed fairly close to the river. Nowadays, this is really vegetated with large trees and stuff, and it's hard to believe that you could even see a track there now, especially in the summertime. Here was that train crossing that bridge again at Angela and Riverside. Another view here. That passenger car, we spoke about that in one of the earlier parts, where those were commuter coaches that were sent off to repair and utilize the South Bend to Niles line when they were heading to the shop and probably back from the shops. Here's that one of the derailments we talked about. That's the Portage Avenue overpass there, 1976. It looks like a pretty good one. The word was that it had something to do with improper braking, but you kind of wonder if poor track conditions didn't have a lot to do with it as well, as this was the site of other derailments. We've seen some pictures of those and some of the other videos on this channel. That kind of pink looking sand probably has that cast from the age of these photographs, but it almost kind of looks like Nestle Quick strawberry powder. Another good look at that derailment, and yeah, pretty good one. Rails definitely messed up. Being on a curve there, that probably made it a difficult proposition to keep trains on the track. Not only the fact that the track was not in good condition, but just being on a curve. Notice the Wagoners sign. That was the Wagoners property there. That was a freight customer for coal and I believe possibly even oil or something like that back in the day, but that shut off in later years. Now we get back to that Holy Cross area, Vassar Avenue. This is a train that's approaching the crossing, heading north. Now, this is where that boundary comes into play, because what's going on here is rules required that trains going to the Michigan Central had to be escorted out of Oliver's Yard. And that's what this train is doing here. It escorted that train up to Vassar Avenue because that's the closest switch to the divider, so it's pulling into the siding. That's the Drury siding, and then the train will pass by. Now this even continued into New York Central and even Penn Central. Then the difference was the Michigan division versus the Chicago division. So that's kind of a little interesting tidbit of the way operations took place sometimes. Here you see that train passing on by while the escort takes the siding. Again, that's the Drury's complex siding that they are on right now. Here's some video of mine that I added of this same location by Holy Cross School. This was from 1990.
They don't use the horn much today, just a bell, and no caboose. Traveling light, probably because this is only a pickup. Vassar Street. That switch is what led into the old Drury's Brewery complex. That was still operated, I believe, into the 70s. I recall Penn Central going in there when I was a student at Holy Cross School. Other small businesses were in that complex in the early 80s, including Martin's Supermarket and Chemlon. They were takers of freight by boxcar. There was a pretty big fire there in the early 80s, and that pretty much ended any freight deliveries, as I recall. That is Portage Avenue overpass.
So, as we said in the other videos, special thanks first of all to David Korkhouse. I mean, this has been a blast to see this stuff, and we're just so thankful of the video and pictures that he took, because as we've said, there's not really that much. I've been told there's very little of Niles to South Bend, and I mean, other than this and what I've shot, I really don't know of any others. And the Strombacks, they had quite a bit of pictures, but video, I've only seen my own and Dave's, so I mean, we're just eternally grateful to have this. But everybody else here too, David Phillips, Doc Bachman, Dan Lewacki, Tom Burke, his proper spelling at the very top, Tom Kepshire with the Monon Society, courtesy of the Monon Society, Sandy Goodrick, Lou Ragg, past NIRS president, George Elwood, Kyle Korkhouse, Niles Crew Base, and anybody else we forgot, because, you know, if it weren't for the pictures and the maps, and some cases just their knowledge of the way things were was extremely helpful to do this, if not a requirement. Thanks for watching. We hope you've enjoyed this presentation as usual. If you've been pushed here from YouTube and this is the first part of this series you're seeing, be sure and watch the rest of it. Also, if you're particularly interested in the Niles to South Bend line, or even some of these old Conrail branch lines in general, check out the rest of the channel. We have quite a bit of videos on here that pretty much cover just that, with even a lot of old pictures and even some video from the Conrail years. So again, thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, and all that good stuff. And we'll see you again next time for part 6. Take care, and we'll see you trackside.